What's up, guys? I'm Chris Spags here, back in another Four Corners video breaking down today's 7-game NBA slate, courtesy of Osmo.com. Now, the advice I give is only as good as the amount of likes and comments we get, so make sure to like this video right now, leave a comment down below, tell me which player's jumping out the most to you so far in today's slate. I'll jump in later, answer any questions, talk with you guys as well, so go ahead, like the video right now, and leave a comment down below. The first corner I want to hit on is a game with the Clippers visiting the Lakers, going a very long way for this one. And this one is a slate-high 237-point total, which represents an 8.1-point boost for the Lakers and a 2.4-point boost for the Clippers. LeBron James has been averaging 64.1 fantasy points over his last 7 games as he tries to get the Lakers into the playoffs, though it's looking less likely by the day, especially as they keep losing to teams like the Suns. So for right now, we can assume LeBron's going to be getting probably over 39 minutes. That's been where he's been in pretty much all these games as well. As high as 42, as high as 43. So we're seeing a lot of minutes from LeBron. He's going to keep pushing it up. He looks like a pretty safe play today, as well as one who has enough upside because, again, the Lakers are doing everything they can to make the playoffs right now. Brandon Ingram's been reliably better than Kyle Kuzma recently. I think that's the case again today. You see a little bit more usage for him. He's also doing some good jobs rebounding and assisting. I like Brandon Ingram. I would pay a little bit more for him because he's going to be less owned than Kyle Kuzma because people still think Kuzma's got that upside, and maybe he does, but he's just not shooting enough to get there, not doing enough in other categories, so I would prefer Brandon Ingram by a pretty decent margin today. Rajon Rondo is expected for 21% ownership, going to be one of the higher owned guys on today's slate. He's a boomer bust play, but I think this is a good spot to go to him. Again, we have that very high total here, so you have a decent probability of Rondo picking up some more assist upside. It's also a higher pace spot, so that should benefit him a bit here, as opposed to the down pace spot he had versus the Suns in which he faltered. So I think Rondo's a good play here. Probably not going to go crazy above the field on him because he does have that bust potential as well, but the boom potential is too big. He does have tournament winning upside, so matching the field or a little bit above it for Rondo does make sense. JaVale McGee picked up 26 minutes versus Phoenix, and I don't know that you're going to see that same run again. He took minutes away from Reggie Bullock in that game. The Lakers have been playing small recently. I think the matchup with DeAndre Ayton, who ended up having a monster 50 fantasy point day, was the reason you saw McGee get more run. So I think having some exposure to McGee makes sense. Again, the Lakers are going to play whatever lineup is going to give them a shot to win, so I think that does make JaVale McGee a person to consider today, but I wouldn't bank on him at a high volume because he could just not see the minutes and they could go back to Reggie Bullock. Lou Williams had 43.25 and 50.25 fantasy points versus the Lakers this year. His price is down. He's going to be around 10% ownership. Lou has been really boomer bust recently, even by Lou's standards, not hitting that ceiling a crazy amount recently. But I think today is a boom day. I like him in the spot, so I would be pretty comfortable with Lou Williams, especially at just 10% expected ownership. Danilo Gallinari hasn't spiked a big upside day recently, but he has looked good when he's been given an opportunity against pretty weak defensive teams. He put up 34.75 fantasy points in just 23 minutes in a blowout versus the Knicks. I think this is another spot where you could see his usage get going. Again, the Lakers defense just not that good recently. Danilo Gallinari really could get going in that first unit, so I like him quite a bit here. Landry Shamet, a guy I've mentioned recently as well. He shot 12 times in his last 2 games, and that includes over 10 3-point attempts, so in each of those spots. So Landry Shamet's going to be able to bomb. He does have upside if his shot continues to fall at a really high clip like it has in those 2 games. If it doesn't fall, you're going to find some problems, but Landry Shamet, an interesting tournament play to me because, again, he's getting 10 3-point attempts a game recently. That's pretty much all you need to know. And there are some other Clippers who you could take a shot at. I think Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, given the 30 minutes of run he's been getting recently, seems fair. But I would like to target the bigs. Ivica Zubac in particular, I think, can really get going. It is a revenge spot. But more than that, he's had 10 rebounds in his last 2 games or more. I think the double-digit rebounding upside you're seeing versus the Lakers team who's been bad inside could really benefit him. I think if he doesn't get going, you're going to see Montrezl Harrell get going. But if Zubac does just enough, I think he's going to take enough off the table for Harrell, where Zubac might be a decent play, Harrell might be a bad play. But I think Zubac can really get going, so I'm going to have some exposure to him. I think this could be a big day for him versus a team who probably shouldn't have traded him away at all. Next corner I want to hit on is a game with the Pelicans visiting the Jazz. This one has their 229-point combined total, which represents a 9.3-point boost for Utah. Donovan Mitchell had 65.75 fantasy points versus Milwaukee. He's also just been rounding into form in a better way than he was earlier in the year. More efficient, not shooting as many bad shots. So I think that all bodes well for both his playing time and how he's going to make the most out of the opportunity. So I like Mitchell here. I like him a little more for not playing Rubio because Rubio was a little limited in that last game, whether it was due to matchup or whatever. And we'll talk about that in a second. But I think Mitchell's in a good spot. Not necessarily a spot I'm trying to trust at a high volume, but I think some exposure does make sense because that is a pretty big team boost from Vegas. Ricky Rubio got 20 minutes in his last game, which was versus Milwaukee, and the question was whether that was a minutes cap or was it a matchup-based situation. The indication seemed to be that it was matchup-based, but with Ricky Rubio's hamstring issues, I think there's a little bit of a risk. Rubio is really good versus the Pelicans earlier this year, putting up 57.5 fantasy points in their 1 game they've played. He's really good in pace-ups, so I'm interested in Rubio today. I don't know I want to load up on him because I think, again, that hamstring is a risk. He could get hurt or we could just see less minutes. I think that's not great, but Rubio is in a really good spot today if he does see his normal run. Joe Ingles and Derek Favors Favors have been really solid mid-price plays recently. Joe Ingles has been over 32.75 fantasy points in his last 5. Derek Favors has been over 32.25 fantasy points in 5 out of his last 6. Again, these guys are mid-price guys. The ceiling's probably not terribly high, but if a slate like this where we don't have a ton of value opening up yet, I think it's interesting to look at these guys here. And again, it's a pretty big pace-up spot as well as a pretty big Vegas total spot. So both Ingles and Favors could continue their hot runs. Rudy Gobert is one of the expected higher-owned plays on the slate right now with 26% expected ownership. He had 54 fantasy points last time he played New Orleans. Again, they've only played one time this year. The matchup makes sense for him. Again, there's going to be a lot of usage inside for the bigs on the Pelicans, whether Anthony Davis is in or not. This is a spot where Gobert could push his rebounding upside quite a bit because of the pace, as well as get some blocks because of those guys taking it inside on him. So I like Rudy Gobert quite a bit here. I think his tournament upside is always in question, but I think on a slate like this where we don't have any big ticket centers who we're dying to have, I think it makes it a little more palatable spot to play Rudy Gobert. On the Pelicans side, I find Julius Randle and Drew Holiday to be interesting contrarian plays at just 8% and 14% ownership respectively. Randle's getting upwards of 38 minutes in games without AD, and AD right now currently questionable. One would assume skewing towards perhaps not playing with an illness. Drew Holiday is going to be around 35 minutes most days as well when it's not a back-to-back, and this is not a back-to-back, so he should see his full run. I think these people are not going to be on these guys. Again, not a ton of ownership, both guys under 15%. It's a nice spot for them if they do keep this close with the Jazz. And again, with Anthony Davis questionable, Check Diallo becomes a little bit more interesting. He's been doing pretty well with about 20 minutes of run so far. I think it's a bit tough of a margin there if he's just getting 20 minutes, but the upside is there for him as long as he's seeing that court time. So Check Diallo, a little bit interesting. Perhaps not a guy to bank on, but a guy to have in one out of whatever amount of lineups you are if you are entering a handful. Next corner I want to hit on is a game with the Knicks visiting the Kings, and this one comes with 229.5 combined total, which represents a 6.4 point boost for Sacramento and a 3.3 point boost for the Knicks. Bogdan Bogdanovic picked up 35 minutes in his first game without Marvin Bagley. At around 28% expected ownership, I think he's worth at least matching. Knicks just a bad defensive team who are giving up pretty generous field goal rates from the floor, as well as 3-point rates. Also some assist upside for Bogdan here. Again, if he's going to get 35 minutes, he looks like a strong play. Could have some real upside. Willie Cauley-Stein had a great day as one of the most popular plays on the slate the other day. And again, versus the Knicks, it looks like another spot that he's okay to target. His price is up, so he's not quite as appealing as he was in that situation. But again, the Knicks are a pretty poor rebounding team, and we just saw Cauley-Stein put up 16 points and 12 boards en route to a 41.5 fantasy point day without Marvin Bagley. I think without Bagley on the floor, his rebounding upside is pretty noteworthy, so I'm comfortable with Willie Cauley-Stein, and I think he's a pretty strong play. Harrison Barnes has also been seeing extended run with Marvin Bagley out, but I think really more than anything, you need to see him get that rebounding upside to smash value in a way that's actually going to help you. So I think I would only play him in a lineup where I'm not playing Willie Cauley-Stein. Not crazy about Barnes because he's not shooting enough to really get a ton of value. And if he's not getting the rebounds, which Willie Cauley-Stein should be sucking up, I think he's not a fantastic play. But again, if Willie Cauley-Stein falters, that makes Barnes a little more playable because the assumption is those rebounds are going to go elsewhere. And Buddy Hield's also pretty playable. Again, the Knicks a pretty bad defensive squad. So I would prefer him to De'Aaron Fox. I think if you're going to talk about who's going to get you 40 fantasy points, who's more likely to get there, I would say De'Aaron Fox is more likely. If we're talking about who's going to get you 50 fantasy points, I would say Buddy Hield's more likely. So I prefer Hield to Fox. I think Fox probably a better cash game play. DeAndre Jordan's the key Knick to watch right now. He's currently questionable as of me recording this video midday on the West Coast. The Kings are giving up 48.7 rebounds per game, so he's actually in a pretty good spot if he does get in there. It's questionable what minutes he's going to get because Mitchell Robinson's been killing it. If Jordan's out, Mitchell Robinson looks like a really strong play. If Jordan's in, I think Jordan's a slightly better play because at least he's going to get that starting run, but I think his minutes overall are a risk, so it's hard to say. I think some exposure to DeAndre Jordan if he's in makes sense. And if he's out, I would have a lot more exposure to Mitchell Robinson. The rest of the Knicks, I think, are a stay away. Damian Dotson's been over 24 fantasy points in 6 out of his last 7 games. But the one game he didn't get there, he had under 20 minutes. That's not great. Lonzo Trier's been over 23.25 in 5 out of his last 7. But really, is that enough tournament upside for you? Probably not. I really think with those guys, the same issue with Emmanuel Mudiay and Dennis Smith splitting minutes. I think Mudiay is close to playable, but what if Smith gets going and he takes some minutes away? It's really hard to say, so I would avoid the rest of the Knicks right now. The rotation's a mess. Nobody on that side projects for over 30 fantasy points for me, which is not great. So other than the big situation, I think the Knicks are just worth avoiding because there's too many bodies, too many ways it can go, and David Fizdale just loves tinkering all day, just messing with the lineups in every way he can just to try to squeeze the most out of them or the least out of them, depending upon whether the Knicks are trying to tank or not in any given day. Last corner I want to hit on, and it was a tough choice because there is a guy who's expected right now to be the highest owned player on the slate who I really like a lot, but click the link down in the description for the switch and hedge to learn more about that because this guy is very important to you, and I'm teasing it right now, but it's a guy on the Mavericks who's a big, so that should rule out some different details there. But the game that I am going to talk about here for the fourth corner is a matchup with the Hawks visiting the Heat. This one has a 224 point combined total, which represents a 10.1 point boost for Miami and a bit of a decrease for the Hawks. Hassan Whiteside is questionable as of me recording this, but his status is a key to watch. If he's out, Bam Adebayo is a smash play. His price is up, so he won't be as highly owned as he's been recently, but this is a really good spot for him if he is in there. If Hassan Whiteside's also out, Kelly Olynyk does become a stronger play. He's still a good play. James Johnson was available last game, but didn't get minutes. His shoulder is banged up enough where they didn't feel like they need to bring him in. Obviously, he's getting closer to healthy, so I think that could cut into Olynyk's minutes, but Olynyk looks okay, but I think he's secure if Whiteside is out, and Bam is really only playable if Whiteside is out. Dwayne Wade is currently projected for about 20% ownership, and that seems about right to me. He's been down in the last 2 games since that emotional win versus the Warriors at home. I think this is a good spot for him to get back on track. It is a good matchup, but it's such a good matchup where you might not see Wade have to push that usage up too high, but I think 20% seems about right with where his price is and some of the upside he's shown recently. Josh Richardson does not have the highest ceiling around, but it seems like a good spot for him. He's been efficient scoring recently. I think if Goran Dragic is out, it's going to open up a little more opportunity for him, and Dragic as well, currently questionable as of me recording this. So I think Richardson's a good play. His peripheral ability also will gain a little bit because it's a pace-up spot versus a Hawks team who's pretty sloppy with the ball. So should see some more steals, perhaps some more rebounds, maybe even a block or two. So I think Josh Richardson's a good play. Could be a great play depending upon how things break with Goran Dragic's availability and just how he gets lucky with the various peripherals available for him. And as I mentioned, Goran Dragic is currently questionable, but if he's in, he is playable. He's been scoring at a really elite rate recently, putting up 33.25 and 38.25 fantasy points in his last 2 games in which he's seen abridged minutes. Point guards have really been gashing the Hawks recently, so I think Goran Dragic is in a nice spot if he plays. Doesn't even matter if he starts or not. The way he's been playing recently, I think he's in a good position if he does get in the lineup. Trae Young is priced up and didn't play a lot in that first half of the back-to-back for the Hawks as he got ejected in just 18 minutes, but he was en route to a big day before he got ejected there. In his last 3 games, he's been at 51.25, 62 fantasy points, and 87 fantasy points, of course, in that 4 overtime game versus the Bulls. Unlikely to see those highs necessarily, but I like what I'm seeing from Trae Young. More efficient, also assisting at a good rate. I think he's an interesting contrarian play here, even though the Heat are a tough defense. You don't need to load up on Trae Young. Right now, we have him at just 1% expected ownership. I think that'll come up a little, but with his price up, people won't be on him quite as much. I think he's really on a roll, which is hard to ignore. And I think just watching him right now, he's playing like a different player. I like him quite a bit here. And I do have to note, Trae Young does seem like a guy who might be gobbled up by the Miami nightlife if the Hawks indulged in that last night. John Collins is doubtful again, seems to be trending towards being out, so we could see big minutes from Alex Len and Dwayne Dedmon again. We also have Omari Spellman on the sidelines for the next few weeks, so these guys are both in good spots. Len and Dedmon have been monsters recently. Len has had 46 and 48.75 fantasy points in the last 2 games without John Collins. Granted, those are against the Bulls, and one of them was an OT game, so many OT games, so there is some risk there. Dedmon's had 45 and 34.5 fantasy points. Alex Poythress is also getting some decent run off the bench as well, so I think all these guys are in play tonight as long as Collins is out. I think expecting them to have the heights they had against the Bulls seems unlikely. Again, the Bulls, a bad defensive team. The Heat, a tougher defensive team who also is going to play at a slow pace. So I think there's some risk there, but I do like both these guys with how they've been playing recently. And the minutes do seem like they should be there as long as these guys can avoid foul trouble. Kent Bazemore is mildly interesting with Taurean Prince out. Taurean Prince out really doesn't mean that Kent Bazemore is going to be a good play. That's always the issue with Kent Bazemore. He gets minutes, sometimes doesn't do anything with them. I think he's still a fine play. I think DeAndre Bembry behind him is just as fine of a play. Neither guy going to really have a ton of upside. I think Bazemore's ceiling is a bit higher though, so some exposure to Bazemore seems to make sense to me if you are playing the Hawks side and assuming they keep this one close. But overall, Bazemore not as appealing to me as a guy like Trae Young, let's say. I'd rather pay the price on Trae Young and not take the discount and go to Bazemore. So there we go. Those are my thoughts on today's 7-game NBA slate. So again, make sure to like the video right now and leave a comment down below telling me which player is your favorite on the slate tonight. As I mentioned, I'll pop in later, talk to you guys as I do in every one of these videos. So like the video right now and leave a comment. And of course, use the promo code Switch and Hedge. I'm going to drop it in right here. That'll give you 50% off your first month at Awesemo.com. All the ownership projections and rankings from Awesemo, who's the top player in the world. They come right from his own mind and his own data crunching. So check that out. Use the promo code Switch and Hedge. And of course, check the link in the description as well for my full column, the Switch and Hedge itself. That's available on Awesemo.com. And again, I'll have more details on there, including that mystery player who's a Mavericks big, who's been killing it recently, who's going to be the highest owned player on the slate right now. So right now, click that link. And I'll be back again soon with more Four Corners content, so good luck.